you're on the internet, you know who the Angry Video Game Nerd is. I don't need to explain that. Now that the cultural icon has his own game with the Angry Video Game Nerd Adventures, he too joins the world of mediocrity. This game is another 8-bit style platformer starring the nerd equipped with the Zapper gun. You play through 9 levels of jumping, shooting, and inevitable death. Each world spoofs a typical platformer stage, and each one is filled with video game references to AVGN videos, and music that references familiar themes. And with the AVGN success so cemented thanks to his style of humor, the game tries very hard to encapsulate that. But it doesn't offer any humor of its own. It's all references which are fleeting, which will have you acknowledging that you get the reference, but no laughs will leave your lungs. Any other attempted jokes is something that has been played out a million times over by almost everybody, coming off as unoriginal and uninspired. That goes the same for the gameplay itself, sadly. Uninspired. Every stage is chock full of jumps, enemies, hazards, spikes, and these instant death blocks. And even though there are 9 stages, they're all ostensibly the same. Even though they may be presented differently, every stage plays out the same. There's only a few types of enemies, and they're swapped out for different graphics in each stage. The same goes for the traps, most notably the fireball hazard that takes many forms but always functions the same. Level design displays a completely rudimentary grasp and lacks any kind of imagination. Rather than come up with any portion of a stage that displays creativity, each is a rather straightforward romp until you get to a boss. And even then, the bosses lack variety, as a majority of them employ the same tactic of fly in a figure-8 pattern. One of the few ways Adventures offers variety is through multiple playable characters, which is actually a great idea, if they weren't so underutilized. Each character has a unique ability and attack, but there is no area in the entirety of the game that requires a certain character to progress, as the additional playable characters are completely optional. Because of this, the levels are designed to be passed easily by playing as just the nerd. I would have loved to see the different characters made mandatory, so that you would be required to use the different characters to think your way through an area. Instead, the only real value from the other heroes is to use them to find the other hidden heroes and the cameo characters. Speaking of which, the cameos in this game are the closest thing to hidden collectibles, with each level having a hidden shit pickle to find, plus other people. And these cameos, some of them make sense to be in the game within the context of the Angry Video Game Nerd. Other ones don't. They are either unrecognizable or make little sense, causing some cameos to feel shameless and others masturbatory. The Angry Video Game Nerd Adventures is touted as a game that's NES hard but fair, and this isn't really a statement that I agree with. It's definitely forgiving, giving you plenty of lives and continues and lots of checkpoints in every level. But fair is debatable, as most of your deaths will come from these death blocks interspersed in every stage. Touching them will instantly kill you and feel like a cheap way to raise the difficulty level without providing an actual challenging area. Most obstacles will consist of something that forces you to wait every few steps pretty frequently, and lots of the death blocks seem arbitrarily placed in sections that don't really need them. They only seem to be there under the pretense of making the game hard. Most of the unfairness comes from deaths without being telegraphed. A fair death would be one that the player sees coming, and it's their fault that they ended up dying. An unfair death is when something appears from nowhere to instantly kill you, resulting in a form of trial and error to get through. And that's fine, there are games like that. But this style of gameplay being called fair is a misnomer, especially since there are plenty of other games that does this style much better. On top of that annoyance, every death screen is accompanied by the nerd spouting one of his foul-mouthed rants, usually involving an animal, an orifice, and a synonym for poop. It's randomly generated, so that's different every time, but the novelty of this screen wears thin almost instantly. For a game requiring so much trial and error, being able to disable these screens, or at the very least press a button to skip past it, would do wonders in maintaining interest of actually playing the game. I get that the intent was to have that so hard it's rewarding when you finally beat it feeling, but Adventures doesn't capture that feeling in the slightest. There isn't a single challenge in the game that feels insurmountable. Rather, it's a series of inconveniences from getting to the boss. And even then, the bosses are surprisingly easy considering the amount of effort it takes to get to them. Also disappointing is the lack of options. There aren't any choices for resolution size or if you want windowed mode, or even adjustments for the sound or music volume. The most frustrating is that the game expects you to play with a controller. The game is way too unfriendly using a keyboard, and if that's your only option, you cannot rebind any of the keys. If you only have a keyboard, you won't have a good time. But if you do have a controller to use, the Angry Video Game Nerd Adventures plays beautifully. It handles amazingly well, movement is fluid, and jumping is precise. Firing the nerd Zapper feels great with impactful sound effects and extra particle effects to make it enjoyable to use. Being able to plant the nerd's feet and fire in all 8 directions is a fantastic touch. The art style is clean and every stage has its own visual flair. There are times when the game is pretty fun. And the music is awesome, like it's really, really good. Easily the best part of the game. Mechanically, the Angry Video Game Nerd Adventures is super solid. I just wish that everything else around that was given a little bit more thought. It's by no means a bad or unfun experience. The game can be beaten in under 2 hours, but you do unlock additional difficulty levels as you complete it on the hardest one available. The game is just okay, but you can still get enjoyment out of that. The Angry Video Game Nerd Adventures earns a 5 out of 10. I do think it's an above average game. There are just too many things holding it back. If you haven't gotten the game yet, it is difficult to recommend with its $15 asking price. And if you're a fan of the Angry Video Game Nerd, let's be honest, you already bought it.